Our story begins on a rather rainy Tuesday evening. Sophie was hurrying home from dance class, but she had forgotten her umbrella. The cold raindrops splashed all over her arms, her face, and through her dance leggings. Her silky brown hair was soaked, and her thin denim jacket had become heavy with rain. She hurried faster, but the wet sidewalk beneath her was full of puddles every time she stepped into one. A wave of water soused into her shoes. She wasn't surprised today had been a disappointing day. Everything in it seemed to go wrong. Her morning alarm hadn't gone off. They'd run out of cereal for breakfast, and her bag had ripped on the way to school. She'd made a mistake on her math paper the week before, and her best friend hadn't turned up to class. Her lunchtime had been disappointing too. She'd had to take the leftover lunch option because her teacher had kept her behind for so long. Even dance class had been hard. She'd forgotten all of last week's steps, and now Mum was working the night shift, so it was up to Sophie to walk home, which usually would be fine, but today, without an umbrella, it was very, very wet. Sophie was good at staying positive all through the day. She had smiled and tried her best to be her usual happy self. But now that she was alone in the rain, she wished that she could just escape everything and disappear almost as soon as she had made the wish. An extra large raindrop landed on her forehead. Sophie turned into her street and saw her house ahead of her. The windows were lit up from the inside. It looked warm and inviting. A small tingle of relief spread through her. She quickened her pace, thinking of what her mom might have left for dinner. Sophie let herself into her house. It was nice and dry. She breathed a grateful sigh of relief and noticed the comforting smell of buttery mashed potatoes coming from the kitchen. She could hear her sister playing upstairs and the sound of the TV in the other room. Sophie called out to the house that she was home. Then she peeled off her denim jacket and grabbed a fresh towel from the closet. She changed out of her soaking wet clothes and wrapped herself in the towel. It was very soft. She padded upstairs to her room. Sophie loved her room. It was like a safe little nest hidden away from the rest of the world. She put on her comfiest pajamas and flopped down on her bed, letting out a big sigh. She felt exhausted. Sophie was just gazing into space, staring at the gap between her door and her wardrobe. When she saw something, she rubbed her eyes and looked again. There, under the wardrobe, was a mouse that seemed to be made out of diamonds. He was small and glittery, and right at that moment he was staring at Sophie, his white whiskers quivering. Sophie sat up, but the mouse seemed to know what she was thinking. He came out from under the wardrobe and squeaked as if to say, "I am real." Then he motioned with his tail for her to follow him. Sophie stared at the mouse. She was already years old and wasn't sure she believed what she was seeing. But still, there was a tiny diamond mouse that seemed to be telling her to follow him. The mouse squeaked again. Sophie blinked a few times, but then she thought about her day and decided that it couldn't hurt to follow the mouse. At least this was exciting. She slipped off the bed and went towards the mouse. Suddenly the mouse ded out from underneath the wardrobe and placed his paw on the bare strip of wall opposite Sophie's bed. A very thin blue outline of a door appeared. It was as if it had always been there, but somehow Sophie had never seen it. She went over to it and opened it inside. There was a beam of blue glowing light and a little platform with railings, kind of like a lift. The mouse hopped onto the lift and wiggled his nose slowly. Sophie stepped onto the platform as soon as her body entered the shaft of blue light. She felt totally safe and relaxed. It was as if it was washing away all her doubts and worries. Then the lift started to move upwards smoothly. At first it went slowly, then it gathered speed until everything outside was a blur. Gradually the lift began to slow down. Sophie saw that the world outside was deep blue and twinkling. The lift shuttered to a stop, and right in front of Sophie was what looked like an old-fashioned railway station. Its platform was long and made out of large, smooth stone tiles. The roof was held up with beautiful wrought iron pillars, and every few meters sat a bench that had iron lies and roses embedded in its armrests. The only thing missing was the ground, because this was a railway station in the sky beyond the platform. 2 railway tracks stretched out into the wide sky beyond, but it wasn't like the sky Sophie had seen before. This was the deep, inky blue night sky. Sophie wondered for a moment if she had reached outer space. The little mouse hopped onto the platform and squeaked for Sophie to follow him. She stepped onto the stone tiles looking around. She breathed in a deep breath to help her take in the beauty and strangeness of this place. Then behind her came the rushing sound of a train. Sophie turned around. Moving steadily towards her was a small steam train that was exactly the same color as the sky. If Sophie wasn't so close to it, she never would have noticed it. The train blended in so perfectly, it pulled into the station and went quiet. Sophie looked up to see the driver. He was an old, friendly-looking man wearing overalls in the same color as the train printed over his left chest, and silver writing was the word caretaker. The caretaker looked at Sophie with a big, bright smile. He invited her to climb on board, and she did together. They stood in the driver's booth. Sophie looked at all the buttons and levers and felt a rush of curiosity. The caretaker started the train with a soft purr-it word into life. A plume of violet steam rushed out of the top, and the wheels began to move. Soon they were riding off into the night. All around, the sky was deep, and inky stars shone and sparkled, and far down below the earth was turning. Sophie gave a gasp of surprise. They really were in space together. They snaked through the sky along the iron railway. The caretaker asked questions, and soon Sophie was telling him all about her day. She stopped when she noticed a very large object ahead of them. It was close to the railway track, and it looked like a giant dirty marble. It must have been the same size as a small house. The train slowed down, and the caretaker smiled. Sophie stared at the object, confused and curious. The caretaker explained that it was a star that had become dirty, and it was time to clean it. He brought out a huge mop with a very long, extendable handle. Sophie asked how a star gets dirty in the first place. The caretaker laughed as he pressed a button behind them. The top of the train carriage opened to reveal a giant bath of warm, soapy water. The caretaker dipped the mop into the water and started to clean the star with it. As he cleaned, he explained, "You see, sometimes stars forget that they are stars. They forget that they are wonderful and twinkly, and that people down on Earth look up at them in amazement when that happens. Space dust starts to stick to them, and the star stops shining and wishes it could just disappear." Sophie listened and thought about her day, and how she also wished she could disappear when everything was going wrong. The caretaker gave her another big mop. She dipped it into the water and started to wash the star. The caretaker kept explaining it was his job to clean the dusty stars because just like humans, stars sometimes need help to remember that they are P.R. Brandt. Sophie swished the mop over the surface of the star. It was glossy and smooth, but the dust felt like sand or grit. She mopped harder until a clean part of the star appeared inside. It was like a bright, beautiful par, and its light shone so powerfully, the Karaka gave Sophie some sunglasses and put a pair on himself. Together, they cleaned the whole star until finally it was free from space dust. It glowed a bright, Brandt white. Suddenly the star began to sing it, let out a faint, soft song that was so beautiful it brought tears to the caretaker's eyes when she heard it. Sophie was filled with a wonderful, warm feeling of hope. Their job done, they stepped back into the train. The star shone brighter than it had before. Its light burst through the sky and lit up everything around it. The caretaker smiled, and so did Sophie. Then she realized it was okay to have bad days. The important thing was to remember that when bad days happened, it didn't mean she'd done anything wrong. Sophie was just like the star. She mustn't forget that she can still shine brightly. Probably Sophie thought everyone is like a star. As soon as she thought that her whole body relaxed, she found herself feeling sleepy. The sky moved by very quickly. She felt the train swaying beneath her. It was as if she was being gently rocked to sleep. Her eyes were heavy, and before she knew it, she was back at the train station. The caretaker helped Sophie down onto the PL platform. The little diamond mouse scurried towards her and guided her back to the lift. Sophie yawned again and stepped into the blue light once again. She felt the warm, comforting feeling wash over her. She waved goodbye to the caretaker, and then the lift began to descend. She was so tired and cozy that she barely noticed the blood sky passing by the diamond mouse sat on her shoulder until the lift came to a smooth stop right inside Sophie's bedroom. She stepped out. It was dark now. Behind the windows, night had settled. Sophie climbed into bed. Her head rested on her soft pillow. The diamond mouse tucked her in. Then he said his goodbyes and hurried away. Sophie lay in her bed and looked up at the night sky. Far in the distance, she could see a brilliant, bright white star. She smiled, then she closed her eyes and drifted into the deepest sleep that she had ever had.